Normandy, a land where wild beauty meets timeless history. Here, nature's simplicity blends with epic tales of kings and knights, where echoes of divine and earthly battles linger in every stone, and among it all, the memory of one day stands eternal. In my mind, the perfect place for a road trip. We picked up a rental car in Paris and hit the road going west. Our first stop, in the town of Giverny, was Claude Monet's house. I'll be the first to admit I'm not exactly a connoisseur of fine art, but this was still an interesting stop. From wandering the beautifully landscaped gardens, taking in the exotic flowers and recognizing the subjects of famous paintings, to walking through his house, standing in rooms whose furniture and layout have been carefully preserved, it was a fascinating experience. Aside from the crowds of other visitors all around me, it almost felt as though I could take a step back 100 years, to when Monet himself strolled these grounds, taking inspiration from the intricate and yet simple beauty of his garden and the surrounding countryside. From Giverny, we headed on toward the western coast of France, through golden summer countryside and a surprisingly corny landscape. Our next stop, the town, come island, come medieval marvel of Mont Saint-Michel. Imagine a fairy tale castle, surrounded by a medieval village, all wrapped in fortifications fit to keep out the greatest of armies, and dropped in the sea off the coast of France. Technically, Mont Saint-Michel is a tidal island, meaning it's an island at high tide, but connected to the mainland when the water goes out. Today, it's a bustling tourist attraction, but that wasn't always the case. Mont Saint-Michel was originally constructed in the year 708 after the Bishop of Avranches had a vision of the Archangel Michael. The iconic abbey built atop this towering rock quickly became a destination for pilgrims far and wide. It survived wars, sieges, and even a stint serving as France's equivalent of Alcatraz, and eventually became known as a world-renowned UNESCO heritage site. Today, it's a small town with a full-time population of a few dozen people and over 3 million visitors per year. Cars are not allowed on the island, so we left our rental in one of a multitude of parking lots and boarded the shuttle for the island. By a stroke of incredible good fortune, we were able to book a hotel on the mall itself, a very difficult thing to do given the area's popularity. We lugged our bags from the shuttle up to La Mère Poularde, a famous hotel and restaurant known for its Michelin-rated omelets and star-studded guest book, featuring autographs from Ernest Hemingway, Yves Saint Laurent, and dozens more icons throughout the years. Our next order of business was to squeeze in at the restaurant to try out the omelets and other delicacies of the island. Bellies full of hearty, homey French food, we left the restaurant to explore. The island is full of steep, twisting streets, lined with cute shops and old stone buildings. The whole place has a very medieval appearance, but it still manages to have a very cozy feeling about it. Despite the crowds of tourists, it feels like there's always a side staircase or narrow alleyway you can slip through to find a tranquil moment alone with the island and the sea. One of these streets, the Venelle de Gay, apologies for my pronunciation, has got to be the narrowest street I've ever walked down. It's little more than a crack between two buildings which you can shimmy through to get between the main street and a higher section of the mall. We spent a long time exploring the various nooks and crannies of the island, but as the sun set, we made our way toward the abbey at the top. At night, in the summertime, the abbey is illuminated with a magical light show and accompanying soundtrack. By the time we arrived, only a few other visitors remained, wandering the stone corridors, great rooms, and cloister, bathed in ambient lighting and ethereal music. It sounds kind of like a tourist trap, and it's hard to convey through the camera, but it was a truly magical experience. After wandering for hours, we finally arrived in the main hall of the abbey and were treated to one last fantastic show. From floor to ceiling of the Gothic choir was a massive hologram projection changing in sync with the music. It felt as if the display was leaping out of the choir and floating through the air. I had never seen anything like it before. It was a magical conclusion to a magical night, and a moment I'll never forget. The next morning, after a hearty breakfast at La Mère Poularde, we made our way back up the narrow staircases to visit the abbey by day. While it was a completely different experience in the daylight, I enjoyed it very much as well. Walking through the same rooms and corridors, looking out at the English Channel below, I couldn't help but think about the centuries of history that have transpired between these walls. From medieval pilgrimage to wartime siege, to its transformation to a prison in the 17th century, this abbey is truly steeped in history. After exploring for a while, we made our way back down the Mont and onto the massive beach recently vacated by the tide. It lent to quite a striking perspective looking up at the Mont. This huge castle really does seem to just rise out of the sand. After exploring the surprisingly massive tidal beach, we collected our bags, hopped the shuttle back to our car, and got on the road. Leaving Mont Saint-Michel, we made our way up the Normandy coast to the beaches, cliffs, and towns that were the site of D-Day almost 80 years ago. D-Day, part of Allied Operation Overlord, took place on June 6, 1944. Hundreds of thousands of American, British, and French troops poured out of boats, landing craft, and floating tanks onto the shores of Normandy to free France from German occupation. The day marked the beginning of the end of the war in Europe, and remains to this day the largest seaborne invasion in history. But it was not without its costs. Inclement weather caused equipment failures and cost the Allied forces the element of surprise. And by the time they made landfall, a bloody battle lay in store. Thousands of soldiers died or were grievously injured on the first day alone. Our first stop was Pointe du Hoc. This was one of the first points of attack during the D-Day invasions, and the ground is still scarred from the impacts of the day. Allied troops sailed over on landing craft under heavy fire. Several craft sunk or were disabled before reaching land, where Allied troops suffered from equipment failure trying to scale the tall bluffs and complete loss of radio communications with other battalions. Walking through the ruined fortifications, it felt like we were picking our way through a haunted graveyard, with craters and crushed bunkers still scarring the land along the coast. From Pointe du Hoc, we made our way down to Omaha Beach. One of the largest assault areas on D-Day, this beach was the site of countless casualties, starting from the hundreds of soldiers who died before even making landfall. Today, the beach is almost beautiful, with sweeping golden sands and a front row seat to the sunset. But this place will always be tied to the atrocities of war. From Omaha Beach, we set out toward the town of Bayeux to learn more about a different generation of conquest, carnage, and power in Normandy, the medieval period. In the heart of Bayeux, nestled in the basement of a historical museum, lies the Bayeux Tapestry. Photography was not allowed in the room, so I'll show some photos of it from online. The tapestry is a long-running banner, over 200 feet long, which depicts in detail an account of the Norman conquest of England in 1066. At first glance, it appears to be a crudely made series of sketch-like figures, but upon further inspection, it's so much more than that. The tapestry itself dates back to the 11th century, and historians believe it was commissioned within a few years of the ancient battle itself. The thought of seeing a piece of art this old, centuries before the time of Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo, is truly mind-bending. These weren't crude sketches made 20 years ago. They were the state of art and storytelling almost 1,000 years ago. After spending a while examining the tapestry and learning its fascinating history, we made our way out of Bayeux and in the fading light drove toward the coastal town of Etretat. With its massive chalk cliffs and coastal exposure, Etretat feels almost like it belongs in Britain, but the town definitely has a French charm. And while it was occupied by the Nazis in World War II, This is a part of Normandy that saw significantly less death and destruction during the D-Day invasion. We arrived in town late, checked into our Airbnb, and went to sleep. The next morning, we awoke to the gentle patter of rain on the roof. Being from the Pacific Northwest, this was no discouragement. After a quick breakfast, we left the house on foot to explore the tops of the chalk cliffs that surround the town. These trails and cliffs aren't nearly as harrowing as the La Trépierre cliffs on the Icelandic West Fjords, but by any other standard, they're pretty intense. Rising up to 300 feet above the sea, the grass-topped white rock cliffs form a ruggedly beautiful landscape, and the trails let you walk pretty close to the edge. We spent hours walking along the cliff tops, soaking up the ocean breeze, channel views, and unique scenery. After exploring the cliffs, we stopped by the Etretat Botanical Gardens. Perched atop a hill overlooking the town, the botanical gardens are small but well-tended and have a deeply serene ambiance. Something about walking down a perfectly landscaped wooded path in a gentle rain sends me straight to my happy place. The gardens also offer some nicely framed views, with glimpses of the town, cliffs, and sea peeking through the elegantly sculpted shrubbery. From the gardens, we made our way back down the slope into town. The tide had receded over the course of the day, and we found a massive expanse of beach now wide open in front of us. Right from the town, the surface of the beach was made up of blue and orange stones. As we walked further down the beach, the surface changed from pebbles to rough rocks covered in kelp, seaweed, and tide pools. It felt as though we'd left the pretty French village for a rugged, wild shoreline. Among the towering cliffs and expansive rocks lay a few interesting features. For one, the beach seemed to be covered in decaying concrete, from odd structures built directly into the cliff to massive concrete pools slowly decaying back into the beach. The geological features were also numerous, from cavernous caves carved into the cliff sides to towering arches hanging out over the sea. It was a beautiful place to explore. After exploring the beach, we made our way back into town for a quick dinner on the waterfront before heading to bed. The next morning, we climbed back into our rental car and made our way back to Paris for the long flight home. As our journey through Normandy came to an end, we were left with a profound appreciation for the region's rich tapestry of history and natural beauty. From Monet's tranquil gardens to the medieval wonder of Mont Saint-Michel to the poignant D-Day beaches, Normandy was an incredible place to visit, and I hope I'll have the chance to see it again someday.